Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, wherever you are, dear colleagues. I am here to present a report on a problem that has been discussed with our community for a number of years, the emerging challenges of the international system of quantities and units for radiation protection. This is certainly a problem that was discussed many times, and that perhaps the time is ripe to be solved. The content of my presentation will include the background, some lessons from Fukushima in 2013, some critiques that were here in the year 2014, an institutional reaction that is occurring now, and in this session there are some of them, but some epistemological changes that still remain and communicational changes that still remain, and one epilogue. The background, well, you know that the system is really one of the most significant international and intergovernmental successes. There are very few industries that have a system like this, so successful. It is universal and consensual, is founded in international accepted science, is based on a universal paradigm recommended by ICRP and ICRU, is adopted by the Bureau International de Poids and Mesures, and is established international standard. What more you will need? Frankly speaking, is very good system, and we should be very careful before changing the system. But notwithstanding this success, after almost a century of good service, the system may need some review and eventually some revision and repair. Like this fellow looking for a very powerful car here. Well, the cars also need sometimes some revision and repair, even if it is a Ferrari. The objective of my presentation, therefore, is submitting a diagnosis of problems and describing successes and challenges to address these problems. We got some lessons from Fukushima, and we published that lessons in the Journal of Radiation Protection, an 80-page report after a request from ICRP, a task group. We addressed many issues arising during and after the accident, and some people in this meeting, like Hans, was involved in this analysis. And one issue arising was that the radiation protection quantities and units caused considerable confusion and communication problems. A relevant conclusion, therefore, was that the radiation protection community has the ethical duty to resolve these identified challenges, and that before another major actions occur, confusions on the international system of radiation protection quantities and units must be resolved. There were additional critiques 1 year after. There was a very important congress in Brazil on meteorology in November 2014. And in this congress, there were a lot of analysis of the system. Was published in a book that I recommend to you, Ionizing Radiation Metrology. It's a book available in the web even. And in one chapter, myself with a group of colleagues from Brazil and Argentina, we analyzed a lot of desirable improvements on the system, quantities and units. And there was an institutional reaction. Is currently going on. There are changes proposed by ICRP in his task group 79 and by ICRU in the committee 26, and in this session, some of them are discussed. And these changes are welcome, but we need to ask the following question. Will them solve fundamental epistemological and communicational challenges with radiation protection quantities and units? I believe that the changes are too limited and that we need to go a little further. The epistemological challenges are the more important. The fundamental problem is a basic question. Shall the same quantity and unit, without any provision, be used for calculating attributable effects and inferring consensual risk? This, as we know, is the effective dose, and the unit is the sievert, and this has produced confusion. Because the observed dose, we know that we wait to get the equivalent dose. The observed dose is real, is a physical quantity. The equivalent dose is notional, it's a construction with these weighting factors that may change. But then this notional equivalent dose, we apply additional weighting factors according to the tissues, and we get the effective dose. The equivalent dose was already notional, and the effective dose is a conjecture. And I am not using the word conjectures derogatory. I mean, it's a conjecture. In physics, we use a lot of conjectures. For we have a number of shots in Becquerel, a number of hits in Grays, and some points in Sieverts. This is a way to present it. The Becquerels and the Grays are part of the reality of the physical world. The Sieverts are a conjecture. In low doses, certainly they are a conjecture. Should the effective dose be used to quantify both factual attributable effect and conjectural inference risk? This is the basic question. And SCARE 2012 can help us to solve the problem because it clearly makes a difference between identifying factual thesis and conjectural hypothesis. The curve of probability versus dose is very simply presented for decision makers with distinct outcomes, but for these distinct outcomes, a common quantity and unit is used. For clinically observable effects, for statistical observable in populations increases, and for biological plausible effects, which is where the problem became at least confusing. And the same quantity dose, effective dose, is used for all of them. Attribution versus inference. I mean, this graph can now be divided in an area where there is individual attribution, an area where there is collective attribution, an area where there is inference. And again, the same dose and the same units are used. Is this epistemologically correct? Well, at least we need to discuss this. The same quantity and unit are used also for providing formal evidence of individual and collective risk. In the top is attestation by pathologists, in the middle attestation by epidemiologists, and now is a radiation protection judgment. And the same unit and quantity are used. Is this professionally correct? At least we need to discuss it. And the same quantity and the same units are used by lawyers for individual imputation or for collective imputation, which is not so common in many countries, is the class actions called in America. And what in biological plausible area, we don't know. But there are imputations. These are the case in Japan. Is this legally correct? At least let's discuss it. But there is an additional epistemological problem. Should the same family of dosimetric quantity without a provision be used for intensive quantities, the dose, and extensive quantities, the collected dose? As we know from physics, intensive and extensive quantities are very different quantities, and we're using the same unit for both. Is epistemologically correct to say the same basic dosimetric quantity for intensive and extensive quantities? Well, let's at least to discuss it. And this has produced communication challenges, and this revision should facilitate the solve the problem of this communication. The communication problem on quantities and units is that there is a problem among experts. And of course, then there is between experts and the public. This is very difficult, but this is the real problem. When among experts we have these differences. We are using confusing words for the public. Dose, radiation effect, risk, people do not understand. Some scientists say sort of dose and risk, other equivalent dose and risk, other effective dose and risk, and some said what is a dose, what is a risk? And the poor member of the public does not understand neither dose nor risk. And some understand, and understand in a very difficult way, which is creating very big problems after accidents of psychological and other effects. My epilogue is first appreciation. Appreciation for ICRU and ICRP for the revision of the current system. This is needed and welcome. But notwithstanding, perhaps it might be not sufficient. Let's try to improve the current international system of quantity and units, not only in his obvious shortcomings, but also in his epistemological deficiencies and his communicational weakness. I believe that this still have to be done. Thank you very much for your time. These are my data, and here you can solve or can get any of the publication that I presented here.